You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Welcome, Mudar Zahran, Secretary General of the Jordanian Coalition of Opposition, or what I like to call a clear-thinking man of sobriety and a friend. Mudar, welcome to the Final Say.
Thank you very much for having me again, and glad to be with my friends.
So let's jump right into it. So first off, I want to jump out of the Palestinian equation momentarily because, as you know, if it happens in the Middle East, it affects all the other countries around. And the big issue right now is a war going on in Yemen, and in some ways very, very positive, right? We've seen a coalition not being led by, almost in the absence of America, somebody stepped in and said, oh my God, we need some adults in the room, and we cannot let Iranian hegemony go unchecked. So I wanted to get your take on the attack, what you think the outcomes would be, and what you're hearing on the street, what kind of feedback, particularly from the Palestinians' perspective, what they think of this and what you think of this.
Well, over the country in a very quick period. Iran flew its own military. I've warned from this a month ago. They flew their own soldiers into the country, toppled an elected, democratically elected president, and they took over a country that borders many important countries, including proximity to Somalia, where U.S. fleet usually travels through the Suez Canal. Yemen is very essential and very critical to American and international interest. As far as the Jordanian or the Arab street, they all fear Iran, and they are basically very pleased that Saudi Arabia took the initiative to fight Iran. The Saudis are leading this coalition. The Saudis have a very advanced military, even though they don't publicize it. They are the third largest F-15 operator in the world, and they're leading this against Iran, which is basically a very hard lesson for Iran. As far as America is concerned, I as much as I might not agree with everything that President Obama does, this has come basically, to the best of my inside knowledge, with more or less an approval from the United States. We don't agree. We don't think President Obama's negotiations with Iran are fruitful. One of the reasons Iran took over Yemen is that they have a sincere sense of security, believing that they can get away with stuff. And nonetheless, the hit on Iranian militias in Yemen is absolutely, I can authoritatively confirm, came with approval from the U.S. administration, even though it's not publicized. Again, it leads to a need for rethinking and reconsidering options when it comes to negotiations with Iran.
Yeah, I don't, while I have, as you know, many problems with Obama, I do understand, and you're right, that there is American support for this. There is American logistics and intelligence support. The question is, you could let me rephrase that. You could ask the question in many ways, is he doing it because it's what he prefer to do, or is he doing it because he knows that you can't appear to be on the side of the enemy all the time, right? you have to leave a little bit.
Well, let me put it to you in this way. Basically, the Saudis were not going to take this with their hands tied. The Saudis were not going to take this laying down, and I think this emphasizes what I said before on your show. Saudi Arabia has human rights issues. Saudi Arabia is not, quote-unquote, the most democratic country on earth. Nonetheless, Saudi Arabia is a force of stability and moderation in the Middle East. And this is one of the very few occasions where Saudis actually showed the region that they are basically, they are there. They are one of the bosses, if not the boss. So what's happening today is very good, and it's a very hard lesson for Iran, which she never saw coming. Iranians thought that as long as they're negotiating with the United States on one table, as long as they're meeting with Secretary Kerry, sending messages to President Obama, they can get away with stuff. But obviously, it's not the case, and these are very glorious times, to be honest with you.
Right. Well, to be clear, I'm an American before I am a Republican, and so I would much rather this president have even if the Saudi leadership had to talk him into it, I'd much rather him occasionally make the right move. However, I think this is actually very important because if you look at it from the Saudi Arabian perspective, they were essentially being surrounded. I mean, many people I know are not very familiar, don't spend a lot of time looking at maps, but Yemen is directly under Saudi Arabia. Yemen has the chokehold, if you will, much narrower even than the Gulf of Oman has a very narrow entry to the Persian Gulf, which, of course, Iran for 30 years has been threatening to sink 1 or 2 or 3 tankers in there and cripple the shipping lanes. Well, the Gulf of Aden is a much narrower mouth to the Red Sea, which, of course, means the Suez Canal, which, of course, means an incredible amount of shipping traffic between Europe and Asia, as well as North America and Africa. And so I think that Saudi Arabia had so many reasons to come in here, both to protect its flank as well as to ensure that its sea lane borders were entirely protected. So I'm glad to see that they've done this. The question I want to sort of transition this to is, we've had conversations in the past that if you look at Iran as the ultimate, instability factor and perpetuator of evil in the Middle East, and I think that's pretty easy for most people to agree with, Iran has been playing like a pawn, particularly the folks in Gaza and friend of the Muslim Brotherhood, not friend, which we spoke of on the last show. How have these shifting sands, so to speak, where all of a sudden Egypt and Saudi Arabia are cooperating much better, including cooperating with Israel, how is that affecting the perception on the street of Iran amongst the Palestinians in 3 areas? Because I know you mentioned before they often think distinctively differently. Jordanian Palestinians, West Bank Palestinians, and Gaza Palestinians.
Well, again, as far as the Palestinians and basically Arabs are concerned, they prefer the worst Israelis in their view are much better than any Iranian Shiites. The Muslim-Sunni hatred, which I am a Muslim Sunni, the hatred for Shiites surpasses any hatred for Jews or Americans or anyone else. So now the concept, it doesn't mean that they love Israel now, but it means that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. On Iran, I can assure you authoritatively that most Muslims would rather see Israel succeeding rather than Iran. If for one reason, Israel has not been butchering Muslims like Iran and Assad has been doing in Syria. On the other hand, when it comes to heart issues, the Palestinians in the West Bank, they are my people. Nonetheless, I can confirm that they have been ISISized. I mean, they are more radical than ISIS itself when it comes to ideology, view of the U.S., the view of Israel. The Palestinians in Gaza, they hate Iran because Iran supports Hamas, and I can almost hear them giggling in Gaza now for what's happening. The Palestinians in Jordan hate Iran with a passion because of what's happening in Syria. So this is one of the very few occasions in history where most Arabs and Israelis agree at 100%, which shows, going back to what Prime Minister Netanyahu said right at the Congress, that Iran is a very serious threat to all of us. And to be honest, it shows that Prime Minister Netanyahu reads from the same page where the informed leaders of the region read. Saudi, Sisi of Egypt, those are very informed and capable leaders, especially the new king in Saudi. I've met him in my younger years, and I know what the man is about. And he knows his stuff, just like Netanyahu and Sisi do. Now, would this open a new chapter for Israel? I have to confirm that there has been a very different chapter between Israel and many Arab countries in secret, which is an irony because the countries which are dealing with Israel in secret have been more helpful and more understanding and cooperative than, for example, the one country that has ties with Israel, which is Jordan. Very few realize that Jordan is not taking part in the bombings. And this comes at very difficult times for Jordan, very embarrassing times. Jordan's king last week alone met with 3 Shiite and Iranian mullahs, and his deputy prime minister was in Iran 2 weeks ago. So basically it shows you that the alliances in the region have shifted.
You know, it's interesting. I remember if you go back to Gulf One, the king of Jordan, even back then, was an odd and sort of weak character because he didn't want to tussle with Israel, but he really didn't want to fight with Iraq. And if you remember, you know, everybody was treating the Jordanian leader, I don't know, without being too insulting, almost like the simpleton, son at the table, right? Everybody was trying to look out, let's not make them make such difficult decisions. But it seems like Jordan really doesn't have a choice at this point. At some point you have to step up and man up, if you will, and make the tough decisions because the neighborhood is getting more and more dangerous. The lines are very fuzzy right now, and there's nobody who has a guaranteed positive outcome at this point. And the only way it seems to ensure that is to look at what are the powder kegs that your enemies could play off of. And this is the thing that and going back to our first conversation over a year ago, I thought was the most interesting as you were educating me that the biggest risk that Jordan has is not necessarily directly from outside, but indirectly because the king has left the Palestinian people there with enough internal anxiety that an outside force would do better by overthrowing the country by getting the folks upset than they would by necessarily trying to just directly attack them.
Well, I've written about this, an article for the Jewish press titled ISIS and Israel's Border. Right now, the Jordanian public is desperate to the point where they would accept any change coming to Jordan because they basically have nothing to lose. They've been reduced down to complete poverty. I'm not talking about anxiety, unrest like Egypt or any elsewhere. I'm talking about people literally starving. If anyone assumes that this lethal formula is not dangerous, that's a mistake. In addition, the Middle East is not about political system. The Middle East is about leaders because they all can act the way they want, except for Israel. Those authoritative leaders who have ultimate powers, it's all about the goodwill of the leaders. And with Jordan's king, we can argue about him for hours, and doesn't mean that you or anyone else should agree with me, but his latest courtship with Iran in such a public, crude way is not helpful. It's a very bad sign. And it's not only diplomatic lip service. He has waived the visa requirements for Iranians. They can enter Jordan anytime they want. He met with 3 mullahs, including one of them who is the leader of a Shiite militia in Iran, Ammar al-Hakim. His militia has killed hundreds of U.S. soldiers in Iraq during the occupation. I'm talking like at least in the range of 300 U.S. soldiers were killed by that particular militia. He was received in the Royal Court, Royal Palace last week, which is a palace funded by U.S. taxpayers. So I'm not saying you have to agree with my agenda, which I believe the king has to go. Nonetheless, the king has to be straightened out. At the moment, Sky News confirmed his jets are not taking part in bombing Iran. How could he be bombing Iranian militias in Yemen while he was sitting with their leaders just a few days ago? Basically, it all boils down to one thing. The situation is very fragile in Jordan. It's not going to stay as is where is. And even if it stays, there's going to be more trouble to come. These are very critical times, and referring to conventional wisdom, especially from the U.S. part. I mean, I have to call on the U.S. that Israel, please understand that Israel is not the enemy. I'm confident that the U.S. administration understands and doesn't by any chance view Israel as the enemy. But issues with the Prime Minister Netanyahu should not overshadow the significance of Israel. Let's look at it this way. I am a Palestinian Jordanian. I don't agree with everything Israel does. My people have issues with Israel. But again, this is what most Arabs know secretly, that Israel is the only stable ally we have in the Middle East, the only power that's able to confront ISIS, the only one who's able to straighten Iran out and bomb Iran if necessary. And if, God forbid, Iran ends up with nuclear power, it's the only nuclear power in the Middle East, actually the only sane one in the world in relation to the Middle East, who could actually take action against Iran. So Israel unwillingly has become the de facto police officer of the Middle East. And we call on the U.S. administration to cooperate further with Israel, realize the strategic American interest when it comes to Israel, and not basically engage in ineffective human politics.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of mistakes clearly that are being made on behalf of the U.S. by this administration. But I actually wonder, when you look at some of the moves the Jordanian king has made, whether it's some of the rapprochement with Iran, it seems to me that the rhetoric from the king has heated up against Israel. At the same time, other Arab countries, as you pointed out, at least quietly, are being a lot friendly and more cooperative with Israel. How much of that do you think is actually the President of the United States influencing the king? In other words, who are the key influencers? It seems like Obama may be one of them who are actually influencing the king of Jordan.
To be honest with you, I don't think it's the Obama influence. The king has been bashing Israel since Bush's administration. I'm not going to go into trivial details. I've met the king once in my lifetime. I know people who were around him. I know someone who went with him to high school in Massachusetts. I don't think, for countless reasons, that the king likes Jews. I'm not going to say what I already know by some staggering details, but the king is not necessarily in love with the Yids, with the Hebrews. Mm-hmm. That plays into him being the man in power with no advisors, who could disagree with the king, even if his own advisors. So he has had a tendency of bashing Israel for some time, and I'm not talking about only lip service or just, propaganda. There has been countless issues where he has actually worked against Israel's interests and tried to position himself above Israel's influence. That being said, what's the Obama influence on the king? The influence is two major things. One, that the president has bought the king's peace plan in 2013. Few Americans realize that what you see as a peace process today was proposed by the king in a meeting with President Obama in 2013. This has been confirmed by Israeli media and other media sources. And the peace plan turned out to be a disaster, resulted in the Gaza war last year, which was very painful for both Palestinians and Israelis. The second issue is the king has been in touch with Iran for a very long time, and I've documented that with the Jerusalem Post articles of mine. He has been in bed with Iran for the last 6 years minimum. And after Assad, the unrest in Syria, he's been cooperating with intelligence with Iran and Syria directly. And this also is documented. This is not just, accusations. And now with the president negotiating with Iran, I think the king thought he can get away with stuff. So basically, he made what he has been doing in secret. He made it public, and it was rubbing it in Israel's face, rubbing it in Saudi Arabia's face, rubbing it in his own people's face. Because we Muslim Sunnis, unfortunately, and I can say unfortunately, have a historical 14 years old hatred towards our counterparts who are the Shiites. and vice versa. So it's like he has done a lot of mistakes, all because he thought that he can get away with stuff, and he thought that it's all within the blessings of the President of the United States. The President, it's not bad to negotiate with Iran. Let me be clear. It's not a bad thing to negotiate with Iran as long as it's put forward that Iran would never have nuclear power. As long as this is like the beginning of the negotiations, that you will never have nuclear power. You might have at worst nuclear reactors with uranium enriched in a third country like Russia, but not enrich your own uranium, which Iran is trying to do, to enrich its own uranium. And at the moment, Iran has developed cross-continental missiles which can actually reach Europe, and who knows, maybe eventually reach the United States.
Well, they don't have, well, as you know, they actually don't have to reach the United States from there because they have the ability to put that delivery system right in Venezuela, which is awfully close to Miami and to Texas and all of our refineries and so forth. So I think there's a lot of risk there. And the model you bring up is actually working all over the world. There are numerous countries who operate with nuclear power, but who do not themselves process the fissile material, and that's done either by the U.S. or Russia, or in some cases by France. And so that is a working model. And I think the problem I have with Iran is that the leadership is, the word supreme, supreme leader stands, and that all the steps that they're taking are negative and very destabilizing. So when I then look to, well, who are the stabilizers, Saudi Arabia seems to be stepping up. And as we've discussed in the past, Egypt has proven to be, in my opinion, one of the key stabilizing factors who can have a profound positive impact on the region. And unfortunately, Obama keeps, slamming the door on them. How do you, what's the latest that you see coming out of Egypt?
I have to say that the Arab society or Arab culture or us Arabs, we rarely produce leaders like Sisi. Sisi of Egypt is a comprehensive, least protected man that I think it took us, since the new Arab regimes came to service 80 years ago, it took us 80 years ago to have Sadat. In 80 years, we only had Sadat of Egypt, and we had this Sisi of Egypt. Those are true modernizers. I'm not talking about someone who was peaceful like King Hussein. King Hussein, unlike his son, was a very peaceful man. I'm talking about someone who actually has an ideology. Sisi is an ideologue of peace with Israel, reform of Islam, reform of the region, conquering the terrorists, bringing his country and the region forward. So if the U.S. is going to blow away this chance, it's going to cost the U.S. The U.S. is going to live to regret this for a very, very long time. We will not have another Sisi, at least in Egypt, for a very long time. It's either that we take this opportunity or lose. Not sure. I mean, I understand. I mean, it's very hot. It's very wrenching to realize that the United States has not delivered a few F-16s to Egypt, while Egypt has been bombing ISIS in Libya, has been now bombing the Shiite ISIS in Yemen, and doing the hard work. So if not to give those F-16s to a country like Egypt, who else to give it to? Iran. It's very disappointing.
I think you're spot on. And let's also remember, it's not just their Air Force, but their Navy right now is protecting the important, while the Saudis are primarily protecting their border with Yemen and coming in from the sky, the Egyptians are very actively ensuring that the sea lanes are going to remain safe as well, and that's no small task. We're only running down. We've got about 3.5 minutes left, so I want to stay on Egypt for a minute and see what are you seeing as the latest. Egypt has tried to put forth to do two things I think that are very, very important. One is they've been going specifically after the terrorists, both the Muslim Brotherhood side, the Hamas side, as well as Al-Qaeda and even ISIS elements in the Sinai Peninsula. But they've also, as you know, have made offers to helping to bridge land from the Sinai that could be part of a two-state solution. Is there still active behind-the-scenes conversation going on there, and do you think that the re-election of Netanyahu with a more conservative government might allow those to actually bear some fruit, irrespective of Obama's opinions?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, the offer has been made by the Egyptians, and it's been made like 9 months ago, with a very serious movements on the ground towards the direction. The offer has been disrupted by Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, and by the Jordanian king. I'm not just slamming Jordan's king's name for the hell of it. I'm talking information, accurate, precise information. Those two are working against it, and they're convincing President Obama against it. Israel is trying to do what it does best, not being innovative with the Middle East, because Israel, whenever it tries to be innovative with the Middle East, it ends up with disaster. So it's like Israel is like, we have no problem. We have no problem. If you can do it, you'll do it. But it still won't work, because how can you convince the Palestinians in the West Bank, or the Palestinians in Syria and Lebanon, to make the shift to the desertic Sinai? I think Jordan would make a much more suitable option, and I'm afraid that I could say that a lot of Israelis seem to agree with that point.
Mudar, we're kind of running long here, so I'm going to just give you about 30 quick seconds. Let's call it about 20 seconds. Let people know, please, how they can support your efforts and where they can find you.
Well, please Google my name, Mudar Zahran, and the easiest way to reach me and find me is on Twitter, at MUDAR_ZAHRAN. Again, that's at MUDAR_ZAHRAN. Thank you very much. And also, if you wish, Google my name, search it on YouTube. I appreciate your time, and God bless you and bless your country. And may peace know its way to the Middle East between the Arabs and the Jews eventually.
May it happen in our lifetime, my friends. Be well, and God bless you also.